Mr. Kingsley Botchway is a member of the City Council of Iowa City. He is a candidate for re-election, and he's running for one of the two at-large seats that are open for election this year. Mr. Botchway, I'd like to start by having you explain to us what are some of the most important issues that the City Council candidates are running on during this election cycle.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I really prided myself on was getting out to the community and asking them what issues were important to them. And so the issues kind of flow from there. And so the first one is affordable housing. It's something that I ran on 4 years ago. I want to continue that effort and really trying to, like I say, end that crisis, because I think affordable housing is a crisis. My second point is looking at economic development and sustaining growth throughout Iowa City. With some of the recent backfill and some of the changes that are occurring from the state level, we have to be prepared and sustain our growth to ensure that that backfill reduction doesn't hit us as hard. And then last, but certainly not least, is looking at mental health and addressing it in a systematic way. We've done that with affordable housing by coming up with a plan, and so I want us to pay the same attention to mental health and working with all of our municipalities and other governments within the region to ensure that we are addressing it in a systemic way.
Okay, we hear about affordable housing quite a lot. It gets talked about quite a bit, and yet we all seem to have our own definitions of what that means.
Yeah.
According to you, what is affordable housing? What do you mean when you talk about it?
Yeah, so I look at it from 80% of the median income. That's the definition that we've kind of focused on. And the median income in Johnson County is around $54,000, and so I'm looking at $40,000, $38,000 for 80% of that. Now, that's the kind of definition we look at when we're looking at addressing affordable housing. Obviously, there are individuals in our community that need a little more assistance, and so one of the things I want to focus on in this election is making sure that we at least have that. We look at income levels beyond that median income level as well, and I don't necessarily know that we've done as good of a job as we can done as far as addressing that.
So let me make sure I've got this straight. If the median income in Johnson County is $54,000, 80% of that would be roughly $45,000. So you're saying that families that make $45,000 or less should be qualified for housing that the rent on it is somehow regulated by the city government?
Not regulated. We look at it as far as like what type of resources we're providing from a subsidization standpoint. And so those are the individuals that we have income requirements as far as when they're applying for housing.
So what kind of housing would they then be entitled to?
Some of that is rentals, and so some of that is rentals through our housing department. We need to do more as far as home ownership. We do some of those things through the university program and other programs, but again, I don't necessarily know that those same type of definitions or guidelines are attached to those things.
So what kind of a path to home ownership would you provide to qualifying families?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways you can look at it. I mean, some entities, even actually at the recent Rose Oaks development, look at rent-to-own as a possibility where you would rent, and then after 7 years, you'd be able to, all that rent had, then forms some type of equity that you can either use to sell your home or use to, lower the payment within your home, as far as like refinancing, kind of a mortgage in that sense. We can look at smaller lot sizes to ensure that we're not building as big of homes that we're looking at, and really addressing it from that standpoint as well. And so those are the two key issues that I've seen other communities use as far as addressing affordable housing from a rental or more of an ownership standpoint.
So in a rent-to-own situation, you would rent the house on the understanding that if you decided to buy after a number of years, some of the rent that you had paid might be credited towards interest on a loan or something like that?
Correct.
Okay. Sounds like not a bad idea. Do you find that you've got a lot of takers for that sort of arrangement?
Yeah, I think people are interested in. I think ultimately people want to see the plan first. Again, it's happened in other communities, and so I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible in Iowa City, but it's it's looking at how those plans work. Again, the Forest View development currently is in the initial kind of design phases, and that was one of the things that also was a proponent or a piece of that particular development, where individuals are now leaving their mobile homes and being put into new mobile homes, but there's a rent-to-own type of deal associated with that as well. And so it's happening in our communities from the design stages, and so for me, it's how do we make that something that we can look at throughout the city.
So a lot of these homes would be mobile homes or modular homes?
Not all of them. I mean, there's when the homes I'm thinking of in particular, I believe, and don't quote me on this, is used in kind of the suburbs of Detroit, and basically I guess you could say it's a modular home. I mean, it's a small. I think the ones they're looking at is like almost an efficiency with a 1 and 2 story lot. Almost, I wish I could draw it out. You have the 1 story, then you have the 2 story here, and again, the 1 story is your kitchenette, your living room, and then up above you almost walk into your bedroom when you're walking up the stairs because there's not that much space. And again, it's an affordable home.
Oh, you bet. And I've experienced living in a mobile home myself, and they're really not to be sneezed at. They have
Right.
a bad reputation, but they are really just small houses.
Exactly. Yeah.
So do you envision these developments going up in specific parts of the city? Do you have your eye on certain tracts of land and so on?
You know, it's tough. I don't. You know, I think that it's so interconnected because I think that it's tough because some of my affordable housing kind of methodology or thinking around it really focuses on the fact that we need to infill. And so, as you know, Iowa City is only so big, and we abut, Coralville and some of the other communities. Now, when we annex properties, that's where I think there are some interesting places that we can use. I look at, the South District Plan and what it proposes from that standpoint, from a city perspective, and whether or not we can incorporate something differently there. Over near Alexander Elementary School, where there's a lot of farmland over there that the school district was built, or the school building was built. There's some thoughts as far as how we're going to move forward in that particular way. And so there's some areas that I'm looking at, but again, I think it really is here's a tough issue as far as thinking about how it pertains to infill development as well. And so, not necessarily, but those are some of the plots that I think about as far as being open areas that the Iowa City has already planned to move forward on. And so making sure that we have housing that reflects different levels of income.
All right, and to get back to another point that you said is a major issue in this coming election cycle, mental health. Mm-hmm. What can the city do to make life more comfortable for its mentally ill residents, or make whatever other improvements ought to be made in this area?
Yeah, well, something's already happening, and so we are, as a council, are deliberating, and we actually designated Susan Mims as our individual to be on the committee, or I can't remember what they call themselves, but committee to look at the crisis intervention training that all of our officers are getting. I know that the county has already gone through it. And that training really focuses on de-escalation and addressing how you address de-escalating somebody who is exhibiting a mental health episode. And then on top of that is looking at an access center. And again, I don't necessarily know where that would be, but it's looking at or talking with the county, other city municipalities in the area, the hospitals as well, as far as developing this access center to ensure that there's adequate care, especially short-term care. Unfortunately, the only tools at our disposal is either taking an individual to a jail with no room or a hospital emergency room with no beds. And so having this access center, I think, provides adequate care to that extent. Right now I'm looking at it, or it's been looked at as far as short-term care. I'm not necessarily thinking long-term care. And as we build on that concept, how it can extend out to something different. But that's one phase. The other phase is looking at kind of the Medicaid restructuring that's happened in the state level and making sure that, particularly our service providers, because I used to work for a service provider myself about 6 years ago, and I know how tough it is to work with individuals that have disabilities on top of that have mental illness as well. And so wanting to make sure that we can have a tight plan as far as how those services are provided and making sure that they're providing adequate funding and resources to that extent as well.
And on a municipal level, how do you go about raising funds for these activities?
That's a great question. I think a couple of different things need to happen. One, I think we need to have a conversation with all the groups. The county historically has been the one that handles mental health or mental health funding, and so having a conversation about with them is important. Our relationship has grown over the last 2 years. I know that they're already interested in having this or working in this particular direction, and so just having more deliberate and intentional conversations I think is important. It's happened around affordable housing as well. I think that when we stepped out, the county was already thinking about some of these things and has been able to put a substantial amount of affordable housing as well, and so a similar concept. But I also think that there's other areas that we can look at. We were able to use or actually get about $1.5 million towards affordable housing in particular fund or a line item in our budget. I think it's the same way where you have to necessarily, we have to designate a line item for it. I don't necessarily know that we'll always have the resources to put funding in there, but how do we pool those resources? How do we help other organizations leverage additional state or federal funding to put in this fund or put in some fund held by some fiscal agent to ensure that people are getting the resources they need?
Now, we seem to be seeing a lot more evidently mentally ill people on the streets than we used to. We seem to see more homeless people on the streets, and most of these appear to have some sort of severe mental issue. Why this proliferation?
I don't know. I mean, I think that when I've talked to folks, this is a resource-rich area, and so I think a lot of people come looking for or finding things. I would say that some of the I can't remember how long, I shouldn't say recent study. I remember going to a law school symposium around how there's more women and children that are actually homeless than men. And how that isn't necessarily as readily a topic that's discussed because we don't necessarily see kind of women and children, in the Ped Mall or in the more trafficked locations. And so, I don't have an answer for that. I think that there's a lot of different issues that happen. There's actually kind of a study or it's not a game, but it's a test you can take to show what issues can lead to homelessness. And it just takes a couple of trips along the way where you don't necessarily have the family support and other things, that you come here looking for some opportunities and you may fall to the wayside. And so that's where I think that the city can really step in and step up and really help people kind of find out how they can navigate and find and access to better resources.
Now, with regard to the election, there are 3 people running for 2 at-large seats.
Correct.
So 2 of the 3 of you are certain to be elected. What would you say differentiates you from the other 2 candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I bring a balanced perspective. I really look at it and truly look at it from all angles, even the angles that people may not want to look at or feel like it's the most difficult. I feel like I'm the candidate that has been out and talked to all groups. Doesn't matter where you're coming from. Doesn't matter if you maybe disagree with me on a lot of different points. I still want to reach out to you and kind of find out what your issues are. How can we come to some commonality? That's truly what I believe, breathe, do in every single thing that I do. I would also say that I'm about the work. It's one thing to say these things as politicians do. It's another thing to actually be out there and doing it on a regular basis. At the recent Legal Women Voters Forum, that was my last comment to say, I am what I am. I mean, what you see is what you get. If you tell me a problem, I'm going to try to continue working on it until I fix or solve the problem or pass it to somebody else who can do it better than me. And so that's what I'm about. I work hours trying to figure out issues not only for the city but also in my other role. And so, if you elect me, that's what you'll get. You'll get somebody that really wants to dive in, work on these issues, and handle the big problems. I remember when I ran 4 years ago, people were telling me, "Why are you, as a new candidate, talking about affordable housing? It's been talked about for years. What can you do?" And I was like, I don't necessarily have the biggest plan, but I have a plan as far as how do we address it? How do we look at it systematically or systemically? And I was able to get that plan done. And so, this isn't like a career for me. This is something that I feel like is an obligation to help the city and help residents within our city, a city that I love. And so, I just think it's whatever we can do to make it the best place possible to live, and I just truly believe that.
Do you have any substantial differences on the issues with the 2 other at-large candidates?
I would say not so much with Mazahir. I would say that with Mazahir Salih. I know her personally, that's why I said her first name, but I apologize. Miss Salih. Miss Winnicky, I think we have some differences on the issues as far as addressing an entire Iowa City compared to just focusing on student population. I'm one of the few counselors, and I'm actually the youngest counselor in this election outside of Ryan Hall. And so I would say that, for me, I'm very into student issues and want to make sure they're a focal point for everything that we do. I think that they're inclusive of everything that I've talked about. You know, you can't talk about affordable housing without talking about students, because I remember when I was a graduate student paying $1,000 for housing and paying that through student loans. It wasn't affordable, and it's still not affordable because I'm still paying for it. And so, you know, I think that we disagree as far as looking at it from a larger scope of Iowa City and making sure that we're looking at all the issues across the board for all of its residents. But I mean, Ms. Winicky has also some really good points around, you know, the things that she's focused on, in particular around the students in the downtown.
Another thing I'm curious about is that it strikes me odd that we have so few candidates running, and that seems to have been the case in several of the past few elections. Now, I did a lot of my growing up here in the 1960s and 70s, and then I left for about 30 years and lived in New York and came back fairly recently. And I noticed the huge difference is that when I was a kid growing up here, the city council elections were real knockdown, drag-out affairs with lots of candidates, almost always a primary election before the general election to thin out the field. And these campaigns could get really acrimonious and people would get so emotionally involved. And now, my gosh, people are running practically unopposed in a lot of these, especially in the district elections. What the heck has happened?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that some of it has to do with lack of apathy, not necessarily just for city council elections, but elections in general. I feel like, you know, over the years, the political process has really put a stain on a lot of people's feelings about, you know, democracy and some of the other things on either side. And so I think that it's become particularly divisive at times, and it's a lot of work. I think that, you know, for me, like I said, it's not something that I take lightly. I spend a lot of hours reading, studying, listening to, talking to folks, and so, you know, I think that people with their lives wanting to be ingrained in so many different things is tough. Not to say that before that wasn't the case as well, but it's just, I think it's to a certain extent necessarily different, but I think that people in general have a different mentality as far as the entire political process and whether or not they want to engage. I know that for me, it took me, even thinking about re-election, it took me a lot of thought behind. I have a young son. Is it something I want to engage into again? Thinking about how I'm going to balance not only a young son, but also a full-time job. Even if you look at it from a council standpoint, not all of our members are like full-time employees. Some of them are retired, which is, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that, you know, to have full-time people on council that are working other jobs full-time, is really tough. And it's a family discussion. It's a family affair, and it's tough.
Do you have a career other than being a city councilor?
I do, and so I currently work for the school district as the director of equity and engagement.
And what does that entail?
It entails a lot. Basically, I'm the compliance officer for all federal, state, and local law, school law as well, within our jurisdiction, within our school district. And with that comes not only training with employees, but also the filing of basically all complaints. And that's, you know, parents, students, staff members, and so that keeps me pretty busy. On top of that, I look at disproportionality across the district and what we can do to ensure that we are increasing the achievement and decreasing the disproportionality within discipline from African American students or Hispanic students, really from all backgrounds, people with disabilities. But also, you know, working to just make sure that we have a cultural environment or a great environment for everybody. So that takes a lot of time sometimes.
I suppose so. And what are some of the most frequent complaints that you have to deal with?
I think for the most part is harassment, bullying, you know, and that can be as low as, you know, somebody teasing me and consistently teasing me or has teased me for a number of years. I'm now just coming to you with it now that it's like a huge or a bigger issue, or looking at it from, you know, as we look at sexual harassment and things that, you know, are said in the locker room or not said in the locker room and, you know, either seen via social media. That's really been a expansive realm from my department standpoint where, you know, information that may be between two individuals that didn't necessarily have the larger footprint of getting out, not saying it means wrong regardless, but it gets out now on Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Yik Yak or Kit Kat, whatever it is.
Right, but you've got no privacy
everywhere
anymore.
Yeah, and so it's really tough from that standpoint as far as deciphering who said it, how it impacts not only the individual that may be talked about or individuals, but also the entire community at large. So it's it can be somewhat of a complicated investigation.
Now, did you grow up here, or did you come here for your education and decided to stick around?
Yeah, so I'm originally from South Carolina. I went to the University of South Carolina in Columbia, South Carolina, and I came here for my law school degree.
And you graduated from law school when?
I graduated from law school in 2010, so I've been here about 10 years now. It's a 3-year degree. Yeah.
And you apparently got married and had a kid here as well.
Yeah, so it's definitely stuck around. I would say that I wasn't focused on sticking around when I was in law school, but my partner kind of, helped me, get really more ingratiated with Iowa City and have a different level of understanding with Iowa City, and so I stuck around.
Did you always have political ambitions, or was this something you didn't think of till you got here?
I don't know. I mean, I think that. So I grew up in South Carolina where you have Sean Thurman had a long tenure there. There's other individuals
He was a colorful fella, to say the least.
Yeah. There's other individuals that I met. I would say more from a Republican standpoint, just because of South Carolina and where I was living. This has definitely been a shift to really dealing with or interacting with individuals more from a Democratic standpoint, Democrat standpoint. But yeah, I mean, I think it was just, being in those situations, or not necessarily like a huge desire to do it, but just talking with people and seeing how they've interacted or done things in the community, not only in South Carolina, but here as well.
And do you have any ambitions for further office? Like, are we going to see you running for Congress or for governor or anything like that in the next few years?
I don't know yet. I think that right now I'm focused on how things can be impacted locally, and so there's so many different things that I think you can do at the local level. I have to think about it, but right now, just want to focus on city politics.
Well, now, if some young person, like maybe just out of high school, were to come to you and ask how they could get more involved in local politics, where are some of the directions you'd point them in? Yeah,
so that's actually a question that I get asked a lot, and so I would say board and commissions. I really believe in starting at that level, because you get that experience. It's not as daunting to be up there seconding and firsting things if you've been through that particular process. Get involved in the campaign. Find somebody, a candidate that you support their issues on, and then work for them. And work for you in that sense. Really putting somebody in the position that you can get elected, or they can get elected. Last but not least, and there's obviously other things you can do, is get engaged in other ways. What are issues that are important to you? Send emails, send letters to city council, call city council members, interact with them. That's the one thing I love about the local level, is that there's an expectation, and I think a valiant one, to interact, connect with local officials. And I get that all the time. Conversation, discussion, or at the barbershop or a Java house, or wherever I may be. I think that it's important to do that.
Do you find that people sometimes are not quite clear on what the municipal government is empowered to do as opposed to the county or the state or the federal government?
I definitely think it's so. And so, I think we need to do a better job as far as providing that, necessarily education, but just an understanding of what that is from the onset. I think that, when issues come about, we may talk about them, or they may be on our agenda, but we may not be able to deliberate or do anything on it at all. And so letting people know that right away, and also being clear about what we can do, I think is really important as we move the conversation forward. And to me, that's empowering individuals. I don't want people to spend a lot of time doing something that ultimately is wasted because it's focused on somebody that can't do anything for them. And so, how do we have that engagement? How do we have that dialogue in a more empowering way is important for me.
And it looks like chances are good, let's say, that you're going to be elected to another 4 years. So what is your agenda for the next 4 years in terms of what this city is going to look like? You've mentioned more affordable housing. You've mentioned more attention to the mentally ill population. But what's your broad vision for what this city is going to look like maybe 4 years down the road, or maybe even after you are out of municipal office?
I see this as, first I need to get elected. And hopefully if I do, looking at this as almost an opportunity, or I want everybody from any walk of life to come here and feel like Iowa City can speak to them or talk to them in some particular way. I know that it's definitely served as I think I've talked about it in many different ways, but in this sense, I'll talk about it from just a place to reflect. Iowa City's been hard on me sometimes, and Iowa City's been very beneficial to me as well. And it's been awesome to not only talk with people and engage with people on that reflection, but also just spend that time reflecting on what I want to do and how I want to do it and how it's going to impact so many people. And so, I want that to be something that everybody can do from Iowa City's standpoint. If you don't like, if you like historic buildings, we have that for you. If you like some tall buildings, we have a little bit of that for you. If you like some small buildings, we have that for you. If you like, making sure that you can go 7 minutes from one part of the city to the other, we have that for you. If you want to engage in, really thoughtful discussion around race or politics or whatever your interest may be, you can have that intellectual discussion and maybe even move that conversation to something actionable moving forward. We have resources. We also are deliberate in educating and talking to our public about what we can do, how we can facilitate, whatever your interest may be. I just think that it can be so much more, and to me, it's Iowa City is somewhat in its infancy. Not to, I'm not saying that in a negative way, but I feel like there's an opportunity to grow and be something that, far off into the future is just a wonderful place and is kind of a shining star in Iowa.
Now, with regard to the growth of business in this community, a lot of people want to see more business, a more business-friendly climate, and then there are other people who feel that if we pay too much attention to the growth of business, the town's going to get too big, too impersonal, with maybe not enough attention paid to human services and so on. Mm-hmm. How do you reconcile those two schools of thought? How do you make the town as business-friendly as possible while still allaying the fears of people who think it's going to get too big?
I think it's a great question. I think that the way that I want to answer that is going back to a question you asked me before, and what do you feel like is different between you and some of the other candidates? It's that connection piece. I mean, I have a strong relationship with communities that are underserved. I also have a strong relationship with folks in the business community. We need to have those conversations at the same table. And I know a lot of people say that, but I mean, I'm literally thinking of a conversation I had last week where I was talking to some business owners, some new upcoming business owners, about the social issues that are happening in the city and how they can be more engaged. And so I think that having that conversation is really important, but also, again, being intentional about it. Like, what things can you attend? What things can you be at? Because I think that, there's some miscommunication as far as how the business community feels, and I also feel like from the community standpoint, some of the community, how they feel. And I think that if we can get people in the room and really talk about and decide, what is truly the vision for Iowa City, we can come to a different place.
And what's your broad brush vision?
Yeah, I think it is, really kind of talking to me, it's not necessarily the issue is the business, but it's the type of business. And so how can we have businesses that are the type of business, so to speak, that Iowa City can really get around and support? I don't necessarily think that people are anti-business. I think people are really focused on the type of business that, would be in our community and flourish in our community.
And my gosh, that would take up another half hour of conversation,
Yeah.
What type of business we should have in our community. But listen, you've given us some great information about the upcoming race and about your own campaign. So thank you very much, Mr. Kingsley Botchway. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And thank you all.